Welcome to the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. As a surviving sibling myself, I knew that I wanted to share my story, my brother's story. I lost my brother to a homicide in November 2016, and after going through this experience, I knew that I wanted to share my story and his story. And it's taken me quite some time to come to the mic to tell it, but I knew it was an important one to tell. So here I am to share his story and mine with you. And it's important that I tell the story of the surviving sibling, the forgotten mourner, the story that is not told enough. So thank you for coming with me on this journey, and thank you for listening to my story. After getting the advice to run, and then the irony, I guess, of being run off from being in my brother's girlfriend's home from my own family, specifically my mother asking me to leave because of my reaction and yelling at me, and I was being called several names, and I was drunk, I was out of control, I was all these things, and really what was happening was I was having trauma. I was having post-traumatic stress. And hearing that voice, my brother's voice, that I knew I would never hear live again, was traumatizing for me. And Caleb and his father, dear friend Caleb, the older brother that I never had and now have, because we all know that Andreas is irreplaceable. He's not only just a brother to me, he's friend, confidant, he was so much to me. But Caleb was this older brother figure that I had never had, and I am completely, and I just will always be indebted to him and for being there for me at that time, and just always in my life. And Philip, his father, they kind of rushed me out of there, and my father followed. It just became drama. And there was a lot of drinking. There was a lot of alcohol going on. But for me to be the one, yelled at and screamed at, it was just even worse. Like, who needs to be treated that way? Because we all mourn differently. And I don't know that they had processed everything yet. I don't know that quite a few of them had really processed, like, you're never going to see this guy again in your life, regardless of who it was, right? So for some of them, it was their son, their brother, lover, could have been potential, family member in the future. It was a lot. And we went back to the hotel. I don't even remember. I was so upset. It makes me emotional. This episode is actually really much more difficult than I thought it was going to be to record. Some of the other ones I thought I was going to just completely break down, but this one I'm having trouble doing because these are some moments that I have not spoken about. These are some really intimate moments of the process that I have not talked about. And I'm just gonna kind of roll with it. And I'm sure you guys listening can understand this, because in the moments afterwards, you feel very lost. And I remember feeling very grateful that I had Caleb at my side and Philip and my own father. A lot of masculine energy around me, which I think was needed because of the fact that I lost my brother. And I'm telling this and almost realizing this at the same time, and really being raw and open about this, because I did not realize this episode was going to be this difficult. The post, the aftermath of walking away, for the kind of that final moment when we put his ashes, into this creek. And yes, I still had ashes in an urn, and I also had taken, I don't think I shared this with you guys yet, but I had taken his ashes, and I also had bought this necklace where, if you go back through my social media, and I wear it from time to time now as well, and it's a necklace where you can carry your brother's ashes with you. And, well, I say brother, but, your sister or whomever you've lost. And it's like the tree of life. like I have on his urn. And so I had that with me, and I was just really obsessed with keeping him with me. And those were 2 ways that I was doing it at the time. And we get back to the hotel, and Caleb and his father went to their room, knowing that we would reconnect that evening. But I went to my father's room with, my dog, little Scarlet, and my father kind of laid on his bed, because there were 2 beds, and I was going to stay in the room with him that night because I was very emotionally distraught. It was brutal, the state of mind I was in, if you even call it that emotional state I was in. And my father it reminds me of those Disney movies where you kind of put your hands behind your head and you kind of kick up like the Jungle Book or something, and that's how you lay. That's how he was laying on the bed. And I could tell he was rattled. I could tell he was also emotional, but his reaction to emotional situations is different than mine. And I was freaking out. I was really upset, and I was venting to him and upset and telling him, like, how can they be comfortable with this? How can they just be blasting his music through here? Like, how can, I'm not saying that it has to be this solemn, sad event if they're wanting to celebrate him, because my mother would refuse to call it a funeral or anything that was quote unquote negative or anything like that, which I don't understand why it's negative. It's just what happened. But it had to be a celebration of life. It had to be positive. It had to be happy. Like, we could never talk about it in a dark way. And I'm like, this is dark. This is sad. We're going through something very real. And I felt like I was going crazy. Because I felt like I was one of the only ones that was really sitting there going like, guys, like, this is serious. Our brother was murdered. And it's okay for us to cry and be upset, and like, I don't want to pull anyone down into a dark place, but I just couldn't understand this. I could not understand this. I wanted to celebrate his life, which I hope that comes through in, my previous episode where I opened up completely and shared the eulogy that I wrote for the celebration of life, because I did want to celebrate his life. But I felt like we were missing this other component completely, where something really horrible had happened. And there were people in this family that I just felt weren't accepting it or weren't even acknowledging it. I think to ask someone to accept it that early, I wasn't even accepting it. I was just acknowledging it. And I know now that we all deal with grief differently and loss differently, but it was just dumbfounding for me because I watched so much of it. I had most of the movie played out in front of me. I had most of the visuals, and I had most of the trauma. And at the time, I don't think I realized that that's why I had such a strong reaction, in addition to the fact that I had the strongest connection to my brother in a lot of ways too. My parents, it's a different story. Those are his parents. You can't change that kind of connection. But it was just different. And my father heard me. He listened. But he finally, calmed me down as I'm on this rant. I'm kind of giving you guys a taste of how I was. I'm getting back at that moment. And maybe this is why this episode is difficult for me. And he looks over at me a little bit, like with a side eye. And he says to me, he's like, "Why do you let them get to you?" I think he may have even used some choice words in that, because that's my father. And I said, "Well, what do you mean? What are you talking about? I'm just upset." And he's like, "Who the hell cares? Who cares?" He's like, "You have to figure out how you're going to move on with your life and live your life." And that was probably not the most empathetic or sympathetic way to communicate that at the time. I remember feeling a little jolted because he had been kind of highs and lows on the sympathy and empathy roller coaster with me. But then I thought to him, I was like, "Well, I know that, Dad." I remember saying that to him. "I know that, but this is crazy. Like, don't you agree this was crazy?" And he's like, "Look, it doesn't matter." And that's my father's way of saying yes, he knows, but he's not one to really go to battle on one side or the other unless it's his own battle. And as we continued to kind of talk, he got up and, I think he grabbed a drink or something and got a cigarette outside and came back in. And I'm just sitting there going like, what the hell is going on? What is going on? And he came back in, he told me, look, you need to find a way to, move forward with your life, whether that's going through counseling or if you need to go away for a little while. And he started talking about some things, and like therapy has been an amazing thing in my life even prior to this. So I wasn't opposed to that, and I told him, of course, I'm going to continue with my therapy. And he was like, no, he's like, you've seen a lot, like you might want to consider taking some time off, like you need to probably, not work. And at the time he was offering to help me. He's like, quit your job, I'll help you. Like, I think you need it. This has been a lot. And I told him, I said, that's not something I want to do. No. I kept turning it down. And he's like, no, seriously. Which was an interesting evolution, that conversation. But at the time, I was just like not hearing any of that. And I've never wanted anyone to support me other than myself. I've been so independent my whole life. And I didn't think that would be healthy either. So I did make some decisions in the future, which I'll continue to share on this podcast, that evolved and did help with my mental health. But he was pretty adamant about the fact that I just needed to move on too. And I'm like, okay, I'm hearing this from two different sources now. I'm hearing this from my father, who, no, was not Father of the Year, but he's coming from a very logical place. And then I heard this from the father of my brother's girlfriend, who I had a lot of respect for, had a beautiful family. And I'm like, okay, I know I'm not perfect. I know I make mistakes, but like, maybe I do need to walk away from this family for a while. Maybe this is really dysfunctional, what's going on. I started to have these thoughts, and it became very overwhelming because I started to realize I didn't just lose my brother in all of this. I physically lost my brother, but I had probably lost my whole family as well. And even the thought of that starting to kick in, even though there was so much dysfunction already in the family and I wasn't really close with anyone else in my family except for my youngest sister, it was really sinking in. And I think that part really broke my heart the most, is that my youngest sister, who has been not only a sister to me, but like a daughter to me because I helped raise her, I realized that would probably change the trajectory of our relationship. And I began to become so overwhelmed. But he told me that he would be there for me, and, he was quite tired. He was emotionally tired. And I think the moment for me in this, where I was able to kind of like let him kind of lay with his peace and I left the room, was when he was kind of just telling me that, yes, I needed to move on, and yes, I needed to figure out how to cope with this and deal with this. But I could look over and see the pain. I knew that he felt betrayed by the things that had happened over the past 2 weeks now at this point, and the lies and the deceit, and how there was still so much dysfunction in this family. And the night before the celebration of life, I started to think back to that. My father and I in the lobby, when I had returned from helping my mother run her errands and I was waiting for Caleb and Philip to arrive, him and I had sat down there talking, and we talked about a lot of things. And I told him about some things in my past and just life experiences that were traumatic for me and things he had missed. And we really opened up, and he shared a lot about his wife, his now wife. He shared that he was going to marry her when he got back. He wanted me to be at the wedding. There were so many things. There was just so many deep things that were starting to happen. Even if I couldn't be there, that wasn't a thing. I was just reflecting back on the fact that like that had happened, and I needed to kind of hold on to that. And I knew at that time my dad needed peace and he needed alone time. I could tell he was really struggling. I was struggling, but I needed something else. I needed to not feel alone. And so I told him, I said, okay, I'm going to go and spend time with Philip and Caleb because they've come this way. And he said, absolutely. And he had so many kind things to say about them. And I think he really understood Philip, Caleb's father, a lot because he lost a son too. And there was a a connection immediately there. And I didn't realize at the time, but I was glad that I was able to provide that for my dad. And maybe he doesn't even realize that, but I think it was, no one wants to join the club. No one wants to join the club that we're in with surviving siblings, right? We don't want to do, this is not a club where I advise people, like, this is a fun club, let's join it. Like, let's get together. No, but there is something in, they're in that club of, they've lost a son. And nobody else understands that other than them. Just like nobody else understands what we've gone through losing a sibling. And then there's different, ways of losing, right? Like watching someone go through a chronic illness, somebody being murdered, like my brother, where it's very sudden. Somebody dies of a substance overdose, which is very tragic and sudden also, and horrifying. Or suicide, which is also horrifying. And these are all things that, I was scared for my brother. To open this part up to you guys as well, I was scared for my brother as well at many points in my life. And I've been open and honest and told you that, my brother wasn't an angel. He's now an angel, but he wasn't perfect. And he did struggle with these things on this earth. And I was always scared to get that call that something happened with substance or things like that. So my heart goes out to everybody. But I think that goes through this kind of loss. But I think the thing in that moment with my father was a realization for me. And so I left the room and I told him, I said, I'll be back later. And I went to go be with Caleb and Philip. And I went into the room and I was just embraced with love, which is so important when you're going through this. And if I could give you any advice, bring people into your life if you can, that can just give you so much love, because that's all they've ever done for me, is just bring me so much love. And I think sometimes people think my relationship with Caleb is interesting and unique because we're so alike and different in so many different ways. I mean, he's from the middle of like nowhere, Georgia. Actually, I shouldn't say that. He's from where the onions are from, Vidalia. But we have this deep connection that is undescribable. But we've also been through something like you guys have been through, as I've been through. We've lost a sibling, which brought us even closer in a way that I would not wish on anyone. But when I entered that room, that was what happened. I was embraced and given a big tall glass of bourbon, because that was our thing. That was a thing in the Harrison household, and I'm an honorary Harrison. They were never able to have a daughter, and so they always call me their daughter, and I'm so honored by that. I'm honored to this day, and it makes me emotional. But the three of us sat on the little porch at the hotel, deck. People call it different things. I don't know, whatever you call that. And there was a lot of greenery outside on this view that we had. And I remember just smiling to myself thinking, yeah, okay. My brother he loves trees. And I'm like, okay, there's this big green tree like out in front of us. And I'm like, okay, this is perfect. And we just sat there and we shared stories and we talked so much. And like, we talked about their brother and son, Josh, and that whole situation, and how he had passed from, H1N1 and swine flu and all of that, and it was really tragic, and how my brother was there for me. And I shared the story that I've shared with you guys about my brother being there for me, and how I didn't feel like if that happened to me I'd be able to survive. And that was very emotional, having that conversation with them. I may have shared that with Caleb before. I don't know, but I know it was more poignant to share it then. I know Caleb's father, Philip, didn't know that. Andreas and I had spoken about that at that time. There was a private moment. And we stayed up till, I don't even know what time in the morning, just talking. And it was like so soul fulfilling. And I even think back on it right now, and it was like, because there was 4 chairs outside, so it almost felt like my brother was in the other chair, because he knew them, and I know that he knew I was struggling. Definitely. And that's why I think it's so important that you're around people that can love you and lift you up, because I laughed that night for the first time. They made me laugh about the silliest things. They asked me about the show and the filming and the craziness and all of that had been going on, which I will continue to talk about. But they asked me about, the guy that I had been dating and how he had been thrown into this situation, and they were sending me so much positive energy. We talked about the girl Caleb was dating, and we talked about Philip and, what was going on with him, because he had gotten divorced from Caleb's mother. And it was just, we were able to laugh, and laughing was almost painful, but I was able to do that with them because of the love. So to this day, Philip, Caleb's father, will still bring that night up, not because he's trying to bring up my brother's death, but because he remembers staying up, and he stayed up later with me than Caleb did, and he was just there for me, and I will never ever forget that. Those guys are my family forever. And sometimes our family is not our blood, but our blood is our family. And so what they do to us and with us and for us can be helpful, hurtful, painful, fulfilling. It can be so many things, and it just hits a little differently. But when people who are not your blood and are your chosen family do things like that for you, it's powerful. And I remember leaving the room. Caleb had passed out and sneaking back, to my father's room. Not that, I was 30 years old. He doesn't care, but he was asleep. And we spoke in the morning again, and I remember him giving me money and saying, pay for Philip and Caleb's, breakfast, and, he wanted to give some money, and I was like, Dad, that's very kind. Thank you for that. He's like, no, I'm serious. He was like, they're amazing people. And he's like, I'm really glad you have people like that in your life. And it was just so awesome to have that crossover. And I try to, even now sitting here telling the story, try to find that kind of, I don't know if a silver lining is the best way, but at the time it was. And so we walked down to have breakfast. My father joined us for a little bit and then, left. And Caleb and Philip had to leave, of course, and go home. And my father was in the lobby with, most of the family that was still there waiting to leave for different flights and things like that. And I had to walk back by there with my head held high to go get my bag and go get Scarlett. And my father said goodbye to me. And my whole family just stared, laughing. And, I'm not saying they were laughing at me or anything like that, not that I cared. But nobody came to say goodbye to me. Nobody came to say anything to me. But I felt like the love and the true support that I had been given, I knew that was going to be enough for me. I was strong enough to do this. And my dad told me, he said, remember what I said. And I just told him, I said, okay. And I told him that I loved him and I appreciated everything and I appreciated his support. And I walked out those doors with Scarlett. And I got into my car. Of course, it was raining. I'll never forget it. And I remember driving down that kind of long highway and then on to 75, 85 to go back to my condo in the city. And when I got home, I brought the bags in, brought Scar in, and I just sat on the couch. The couch that I had sat on and laid on, more or less, really laid on for that whole week, just waiting with anxiety. And I was clutching a necklace with the ashes of my brother. Of course, had the urn. And I just sat in silence for the longest time. And I remember going just numb. This is it. What now? What do I do now? This was December 4th, that's Sunday. What do I do now? What does anyone do after that? Is this it? Is this done? My brother was murdered. It was a homicide, or has this all just begun? I had all these questions starting to whirl around in my head. And then I would kind of check in with my heart, and I just felt like not only my heart, but my body was numb. So I stared at these walls in the condo that I lived in, owned at the time. And there were these like grayish, almost like a hint of blue. And I'm looking at them and I'm thinking, I don't want to look away from this wall because if I do, I think everything's going to be too real. And eventually I got to a point where I could put up some bags, of my clothes and things that I had brought, and took care of my dog, of course. I highly recommend a dog or a cat or whatever kind of person you are as support too, because it really helps to have something that you are responsible for. If you have children, oh my God, God bless you. But I laid back on that couch, but I kept myself kind of propped up this time, and I turned the office right back on again. And I was like, I need to sleep. And at that point, I was still dating this guy, that same guy, but it was so new, and I wanted to see him. I didn't. He was so busy with work, and I needed comfort. I needed my friends. And my friend at the time, Walter, who I'd known for a very long time, we had toured together. I had known him since, January of 2010, since I had really started my corporate career. And he was very worried about me. And he ended up coming over, I believe that next morning or even late that night, and told me, you can't be here by yourself. You can't. You've got to get out of here. You've got to, and he had a dog as well that he had adopted. And I was like, no, I got to just be here. I got to keep moving forward because I was on leave from work. But I wanted to get back to work. And he's like, no, I don't know if you need to. But so he came over and he spent some time with me, and I tried to go back to work that week. Yeah. Talk about crazy. So I decided that I think I spent the night at his place just to kind of get a change of pace, a change of, but I needed to be home. And so I think he stayed with me a night as well. And then I was like, I'm going back to work, maybe middle of the week. And he's like, you've got to be kidding. You can't go back to work. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go back to work. So I ended up going back to work at this corporate job I was at the time that I had changed from when I was working at David's. I changed. So I'm in this new job. I've been filming this ridiculous reality show. Here I am. I'm going to thrust myself back into all of this. And I think I thought that, I believe this now, looking back on it, but if I just got myself busy again, or if I had something that I was doing. And I remember going in and locking myself in my office, and my boss came in to talk to me finally at one point, and she was like, what are you doing here? And she was the vice president of North America for this serviced office company that I was working for, and she was grooming me. She was grooming me to obviously be the director of North America, but then she was going to step aside one day. And so this was a huge gig. This is a huge role. And I said, I don't know. And she looked at me and said, look, I need to share something with you, and I need to talk to you. And I said, okay. And she goes, I lost my brother to pancreatic cancer last year. And I said, oh my God, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. All the things you say when you're not really sure what to say, because I was still kind of learning that myself. And she was like, it's hard. She goes, my brother was everything to me, and it broke me. And she goes, even I took time away from work. You need to close up everything and go home. Because I started crying, and I'm not the person to cry in front of people. Now I'm not afraid to. Now I don't hold back. I'm crying throughout this whole podcast, but more like tearing up. If I had done this podcast 5 years ago, I would have been a wreck. But then I started crying in front of her, though. But I felt very, again, comforted and felt the love from her. I was very blessed to be working for someone like this, and I believe that people are in your life for a reason. And she reminded me a lot of the first boss that I had at a corporate level. She was the same type of person. She even looked the same as her. It was very bizarre, and also I there's no doubt in my mind that this was happening for a reason. And she's like, pack up your stuff and go home. And I'm like, I need to work. I need to do something. And she said, if you want to work, it's fine. It's optional, but you're paid. I said, okay. And she goes, I need you to do that though. And she goes, but before you leave, she goes, I need you to come to my office though, because I need to talk to you. And so I think I ended up working one more day or so because I just thought I am so stubborn, guys. I mean, I don't know. Some of us listen to the advice, some of us don't. I listened to some advice. I didn't listen to some. This took me, I think it took her a couple tries because I did go home early that day, but I came back. And I think it was the end of that week. She called me into her office that Friday. Yep, this is exactly what happened. And I said, to her, I said, what's going on? Is everything okay? I thought she was going to be like, go home again, which she kind of was. But she said, look, I want to tell you, I am leaving the company effective at the end of December. And I was like, what? And she's like, yes. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, when is your last day? She's like, December 31st. But she goes, I'm leaving the office. Like, next week will be my last week in the office. And I remember just looking at her, and I am quite fair as it is. I probably turned like pasty white. And she looked at me and she said, you can do what you want. She goes, I don't know what will happen with the corporate positions here. And I'm like, yeah, because I'm thinking, what's the trajectory for me? Because I came in under her, like, to eventually, like, move up under her. And I was like, oh my God, this is so much to take in. Like, now I could potentially lose my job. Like, and she's like, you're not going to lose your job, but, like, I don't know what your role would be exactly. And I'm like, also thinking to myself, okay, great. So, like, VP's gone. Like, would I move into her role, basically doing all her work for less? Like, all these things start running in your head, and I can't even, how can I even process something like that? And so I start speaking to her about it, and she's like, I don't know. And she goes, do you want to take the rest of the day to think about it? And I said, I do. And so I went back to my office. So then she comes back to my office again later that day, and she's like, what are you still doing here? I'm like, I'm thinking about it. She goes, go home. And she goes, what do you want to do? And I said, with you gone, I'm not here. I said, I took this job and I changed verticals and kind of, where I was, and I came from corporate retail. This isn't the same thing. It's not so crazy different, but because of you, like, her as a mentor, she was crazy smart, went to Harvard, multiple degrees. Not that that matters all the time in this world, but, like, she was so smart, and I had so much respect for her. And she had been a VP at several companies and still is today. And she said, look, I didn't take time off. And she goes, you need to. And I said, okay. And she goes, look, as long as I'm here, you'll get paid. If you want to take time off, just think about it. And I told her, I said, I don't think I can be here without you. She goes, I get that. So we ended up conversing. I left early again. And that Monday, I put in my resignation, finally, to jump for this story. And I said that I would work through December 31st. Because she knew my situation and she understood everything, she told me that she had never really processed everything that went on with her brother. So she wasn't going to work afterwards for a while either. And she told me, she said, wherever she landed, she was like, you're coming with me. I said, okay. But she was like, you're not doing a thing. She goes, you take this time for yourself and we're paying you through the end of the year. And she did. But at that point, I was making that decision over the weekend, and I knew the decision was right. I knew it was there. I had the support. I was once again surrounded by love, even at work, and I didn't even realize it. And I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to this day for that. And I would never have stopped working. I would have just kept going to work. So at that point, my friend Walter was like, you're going to come stay with me. Like, let's, we'll hang out. We'll make things a little more normal. I'm thinking to myself, more normal? Like, so here we are. It must have been like December 9th. And I no, I'm going to be off work. And, I look up at Walter. Because I think I just even popped in that day. It was like nothing. And then I was out after that conversation with my boss. And I look at Walter and I'm like, I feel like my whole life is falling apart. Like, everything is falling apart. I mean, my brother has been murdered. My job, like, I don't have a boss anymore. I mean, like, she's a great connection friend, and still have contact with her on and off to this day. But I'm like, what is going on? Like, so I'm like, I need to be around animals. And he's like, I don't know if this is such a great idea. And he's like, why don't we just hang out? I think this was like a Friday. That Friday, I believe. Because I was like, I'm out. Like, I was exhausted. And he's like, you need to come pack your stuff and come be with me. And I'm like, great. I'm like, let's go. Let's go look at animals. I want to be around animals. I needed that. I craved that. I wanted that unconditional love. I love animals. That's why I'm like, have an animal in your life. And I had, before my brother passed, I had been wanting to get a companion for Scarlet. I wanted another dog. I wanted a boy. I wanted to name it Rhett Butler. I had like all these perfect things like picked out, right? It was going to be another like Shih Tzu, like Scar's Shih Tzu Yorkie mix. So it was going to be a Shih Tzu because I really liked Shih Tzus. And like I found one. It didn't work. Like the animal wasn't going to work out with another animal. So like it's funny how we try to pick our own destiny, and that's not how life works. We can want things, but I find it, whether it's God or the universe, I find it that, God, universe, whatever you believe in, kind of laughs at us sometimes and goes, wait a second, open up because I got something better for you. And this is what I believe is true of this story. And so I felt so compelled to go be around dogs that day. And I remember Walter being like, I don't know, Maya, because I'm like really raw, right? Like, here we go. Like, brother, homicide, I'm a wreck. Don't think I'm going to have a relationship with my family ever again. With some of them, was not really new, but with some of them, it was significant and hard, and I didn't feel supported, and it was heartbreaking. And, here I am with this career, thought I was like, this is it. Hit it. The career that I've been trending towards in 30, made it. Nope, not so much. Everything was falling apart. I wanted this love. I wanted this complete supportive love. And Walter, amongst many things, we toured together. He came from, AV production, all of that, but he also came from a radio background, but he also has a photography background. So he actually shot photos of me in the past, but he volunteered like I did as well. And he shot like the photos. So when you adopt a dog, like he shot those photos. So we could go anytime we wanted and just hang out or whatever. And I'm like, please take me. I don't know why. I felt so compelled this day. I don't know what it was, but I felt so compelled. And I'm a hot mess. I'm like, I'm like, I gotta go. I gotta be around love. And he's like, okay, there's apprehension for sure. So we go to the Atlanta Humane Society where he, as I said, took these pictures of the dogs that needed to be adopted. And we're just kind of walking around. There's a small dog area that you go into first. And I'm walking through and I'm meeting some of the ladies because I didn't really know everybody like he did. I wasn't that involved at the time at all compared to how I volunteered prior to the pandemic. I was very involved. And I'm walking through and there's so many cute dogs. I'm just feeling the love. I'm like petting them. It's so cute. And then I get to like the 4th or 5th like stall on the left-hand side because it's a big area. And there's this little Chihuahua like looking dog in a kimono. And I'm like, this is an interesting outfit that this dog has on. And she's just like looking up at me with the saddest looking eyes I've seen in a while. And I stopped. It was like literally someone had a remote control on me and stopped me in front of the stall. And I remember saying to my friend Walter, like, look at this dog. And she started to kind of go, like line up at me and like look at me. And he was like, yeah, she's really cute. And I'll never forget that her name was Laura. Because I love what these places do, and I'm so supportive of the Atlanta Humane Society. I'll just plug them again on here, but, they always give them, like, if they don't have a name, they give them, like, sometimes a human name, and I'm like, which I probably shouldn't say anything with my dog names, but Laura was, like, so humanizing, especially because I have a friend, more than one friend named Laura, so I'm like, Laura. I'm like, this is not a Laura. And, like, she's just looking at me, and she's like, and I'm like, And she starts jumping at me. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, this dog. I'm like, I don't know what it is, Walter. I'm so connected to this dog. And he's like, okay. He's like, let's go look at the other dogs. And, and I can tell he's already like, oh God, we're in trouble today. So we're walking around, and we walk there was another dog that was very sweet too, that he was into. And I'm like, okay, you don't need another dog. You're like traveling way more than me. But I'm like, who am I to judge? And then we went to go see the big dogs, and then we came back. And when we walked back into the small dog area, the woman that was on duty that day, I don't remember her name, but she's the sweetest lady. Oh my gosh. And she was like, guys, like, Walter, Maya. And I'm like, yeah. She's like, Laura has not, that little dog over there. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, I remembered her, of course. I'm like ready to like pick her up now. She's like, she has not stopped whining since you left the room. And I was like, oh. She goes, no, you don't understand. Like, we've only had her for like 3 days, and she's been silent. Like, she's been quiet. She's like not responding to people. And she's been crying, like whining since you left. And Walter looked at me and was like, oh no. Like, oh crap. And I walked back over to her, and she starts jumping up at me and starts whining again. And Walter was like, oh gosh, again. And this wonderful woman was like, would you like to, visit with her? Because there's the areas where you can visit and see if you have a connection. Which I think we already know where this goes. And so I was like, yes. And Walter was like, oh my God. And so we go in the room, and Walter's like, I'll go get the paperwork. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I'm just going to meet her. He goes, I'll go get the paperwork. So her and I go into the room together, and they set her down and leave the room. And I crouch down. This is emotional to this day. I crouch down, and she jumps up and puts her paws in my hands. And I'm so grateful because Walter got this picture. And that was it. He was like, all right, here's the paperwork. He's like, you're getting her. I was like, yep, that's it. I knew it. I didn't know who this dog was, what it was. She was this angel. I couldn't explain it. I was like, what? Why is this dog so, like, giving me so much love? When she came in, she had been abused, and they didn't have a ton of information, but she had just been spayed. They took her and they spayed her, and she had been abused, and that was some of the stuff they had been telling us, as the paperwork was starting to be filled out. But that was it. We were attached. And the thing was, she was everything that I was not looking for, right? I was looking for a guy dog to be with Scarlet because I thought that's what you're supposed to do. Whatever. I wanted like this Shih Tzu or something. I was open to other ones, but she was a Chiweenie, like mix kind of mutt, still tiny dog, but like I love Chihuahuas, don't get me wrong, but that was not like the dog I was looking for at all. I had a girlfriend who had multiple Chihuahuas, which is the girlfriend that I was speaking about at the very beginning of this podcast. That's the home I was at when I heard that my brother got shot. Okay, there's weird part number 1 that I was not thinking about. So Walter is snapping all these pictures of me, signing the paperwork. I'm like, I'm not even paying attention. Like, I'm so enamored with this dog. Like, we are just like so in love. I'm like thinking in the back of my mind, I'm going, oh God, I didn't even think, like, Scarlet and her, hopefully they get along. Like, I hope they get along. And Walter is posting for me on social media because this was a way for me to cope as well. And I all of a sudden start getting text messages from my brother's girlfriend because we were still staying in contact. God love this girl. She is a beautiful person. And she goes, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I'm like, what? And she's like, and we're like headed out to the car at this point, and there's pictures of me holding this dog like a baby and stuff. And I decided at this point to name the dog Bonnie Blue for a couple reasons. I flipped around a couple names because I wanted, obviously, the Gone with the Wind theme. Scarlett O'Hara is my first dog. So I was like, okay, what do I name this dog? Like, I want it to be on theme, but I want it to be like my brother. My brother's favorite color was blue, so I was like, Bonnie Blue's good. I was like, but there's also Chrissy in the movie. My brother's middle name is Christian. I was like, what do I do? And Bonnie Blue is just too perfect. So I went with Bonnie Blue. And it works for her. She loves the name and responds to it to this day very, very well. But as we're getting into the car, I'm, we're leaving, finishing the paperwork. My brother's girlfriend is like, this is crazy. Like, you're never going to believe this. Oh my God. I'm like, what is going on? She starts sending me pictures of my brother holding chihuahuas. And she starts telling me, she goes, in the recent year or so, your brother had been wanting a dog and he wanted a chihuahua or a chihuahua mix. You guys, my heart literally, if it can stop and you can still live, like, it stopped. How was that possible? How was that possible? And then I realized, this is so, like, culturally inappropriate, but it was a thing, and I do think this was a sign. My brother was obsessed with the Asian culture, and I didn't realize it, but this dog, no other dog there, because they just put dogs in whatever clothing is available to keep them warm. I know, because I volunteer there. She was in a kimono. My brother's girlfriend is half Korean. I was like, oh my God. Like, I think sometimes when we've lost someone, we think, are we grasping at straws for a sign? Are we just looking for things? I knew right then and there. If I needed more confirmation than that, I remember getting back there that day and her and Scarlett hit it off immediately. And I really should have gotten them to, like, bond before, because you're supposed to do that with dogs, and I knew better. But I was operating from this, like, magnetic pull. This dog was my angel. This dog came from my brother, and I believe that. And so I guess what I would say to you guys as a surviving sibling is, like, this was a way for me to cope. I was just, like, starved for ways to cope, but this was a sign. There was no way. I didn't know that. I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know anything about him wanting chihuahuas. I knew my brother loved animals. He always did, of course. So both of my dogs that I have are just so special to me. They're everything to me. I mean, my family's everything to me, of course, the family that I've built now, but that was my little family unit, and the fact that she fit in just so flawlessly and perfectly, and they're best friends. My dogs are best friends. And I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. I was blown away. And then something came to me later on when I was looking at her paperwork, her Laura paperwork, and of course we changed her name to Bonnie Blue. I started to look at the date. And we adopted her on 12/9. My brother and I's birthday is 9/21. It was our birthday backwards. I did not plan that. I felt compelled to go that day. It was actually not a convenient day for Walter and I to go, and that was the day we went. That was the day she was adopted, and that's the day we celebrate her birthday, because we don't know her 100% true age. It was way too weird, and I know now that was a sign from my brother. And it was a beautiful, beautiful thing, and she has turned out to be, I love my Scarlett, but Bonnie has turned out to be, like, she's the sweetest dog in the world. Sweetest dog in the world. And I will say one more thing, because I love talking about my dogs. My brother's first word was eat, and let me tell you something, this girl loves to eat. So that could be just a coincidence there, I don't know, but to kind of bring some levity to the situation. But that was really, really wild. Really wild. But it was a way of me coping, and I felt compelled, but I think this was deeper. I really think this was deeper because I felt drawn. So I would just say to you, if you feel drawn to do something, or I know now, at least I believe this from my heart of hearts, that was him. Like, that was him knowing I needed this sweet girl in my life. And, my brother liked things to be about him. So, of course, I ended up adopting a dog that was the kind of dog he would have wanted. I'm not surprised, but I've never regretted it a single moment in my life. The other thing that I did almost immediately after that I failed to mention, so I want to go back to this, to kind of cope with the situation. I didn't feel like having his ashes and having the necklace. I thought that was going to be enough. I thought that was like intense enough, and like all these coping, I was trying to cope with all these different things, and like I think it was also so hard for me knowing that I was never able to go to his home, and my mother kind of disguised it in the sense that I wouldn't be able to deal with it. You wouldn't be able to deal with seeing it. Well, little did she realize what I had seen. I had seen a whole lot worse. I could have dealt with that. So I was trying to cope. So prior to getting Bonnie, and prior to that really beautiful moment and being compelled to that, one of my best friends in the world, Sloane, she had lost her mother as well, and I believe I brought it up before, 2 weeks before I lost my brother. And I had never had a tattoo in my life. And I always said, I won't get a tattoo until I get married, or like I'm at a certain age. It was never a no forever. It was just like, I won't. Like, and I thought I might get like on my ring finger or something for my husband, something like that. Oh, does life change? So my girlfriend wanted to get her first tattoo as well. And we kind of were both thinking about this because she had lost both her parents now at this point. And my friend Walter was kind of helping me through this. This was 3 days before I got Bonnie. So this would have been on the 6th, and I'm still trying to go to work. And like, I'm like all over the place, just trying to cope, thinking I need to go back to work, trying to cope. Now I'm going to get a tattoo. Like, I was really grasping at so much to feel. That's the best way for me to say this. I was trying to feel something. So when I found this guy, this tattoo artist, I guess you could be certified to like put, maybe this is still a thing, I don't know, I haven't looked into it since. But at the time, I don't know if it is still okay, but you could be certified to actually take like a foreign, they call it foreign type thing, like the ashes of the person that's passed or whatever, and they'll tattoo it into your body. So her and I were like, yes, we're gonna go do that. And so we did it. And I thought like, okay, like I'm gonna feel the pain. Like this was the mindset I was in. I wanted to like feel this pain. Looking back on that, like it makes sense to me because I was so numb when I sat on that couch that Sunday, just being like, because it was like 2 days later, and I was like, just put it in me. Because yeah, it was right before I went back to work, and then I had this tattoo. And so we went to this, it was called Owl something here in Atlanta, and this guy was certified, and my girlfriend had a tattoo she wanted on her back with her parents' like information. It was really beautiful what she wanted. And she was ready to get hers. Walter drove both of us. And I, of course, I'm like, I'll go first. Like, I'm cool. Like, whatever. And so I have, like, nothing drawn out. I'm like, I just have the ashes. I'm like, I'm ready. Like, let's go. And he's like, well, what do you want? And I'm like, I want his birthday. I want his death date, because they were both the 21st, which is still trippy. And I said I want his initials, of course, and I want the word dream. And so he goes back and he draws it up and comes back, and I'm like, yeah, that's cool. And so I end up getting it on the left side of my body. Like, it was supposed to be like further down near my rib cage, and because I was so tiny at the time, it's now higher up on my body because I wasn't eating. It was not a good time, of course. But at the time I was like, whatever, it's my first tattoo. Like, you're naive. I'm just like, it's gnarly because it's a weird feeling because it's grainier, but I didn't know that because it was my first tattoo. I know that now because I've had other ones, but it's grainier because they're putting this in there, so it feels weird. I don't know if it's more painful. I wasn't feeling anything because I was numb on life. And so I was trying to do this to feel something. I wanted to commemorate him. That was definitely the number one reason. But I know now I was also trying to feel. Like, I wanted to feel pain. Like, I wanted to get this out. Like, I wanted something, like, I even, like, feel it now going back there to feel real. And I remember getting it done, and I was like, okay, I'm like, I've got this. Like, here's something physical that I can look at every day and it's on my body. And I love this man. Like, I love this guy. Like, he's my bro for life. Like, and that still didn't feel like enough, but it felt like one more step in my journey. But I remember it being so important that I did that. And I remember some people being really shocked, like, wow. I remember years before chastising my youngest sister for getting these massive, like, tattoos. And, you know, I definitely have a lot of remorse for that. And I've apologized to her since, because I definitely said some choice words to her and I was judgmental. But it was more because she was so young and I just didn't want her to make any mistakes where she couldn't. I don't know, tattoos had a different stigma back then. You know, it was a different thing. Now, nobody cares as much. It's different. And so I just wanted her to have so many choices and things in her life. And so it kind of came full circle for me that was the way that I was trying to release some pain that was stuck inside of me. And I guess the thing that I would tell you as a surviving sibling, or if you're supporting one listening to this, that did it help? Yes, it did. It did. Obviously, I adopted a dog 3 days later, but that was something that I felt called, to do that, because that was a place that my brother, I'm very spiritual, as you'll hear me talk about as I continue the podcast, and I do feel like that was a sign. I do believe in signs. So going to the Humane Society to adopt this beautiful dog that's still in my life and happy and healthy and was a great addition to the family, you know, that was a part of the healing, and it wasn't as painful, that process. It became healing for more than one person. I think it was also healing for his girlfriend to see that, because there was no way I could have known. It blew both of our minds. But the tattoo situation, it was also very bonding for me and my girlfriend. Having a grief kind of partner, that's what I would refer to her as. Not only as that, like, her and I are still wonderful, great friends, still one of my best friends to this day. But we really bonded during that time. And having somebody that can relate to you, you know, she lost her parents, which is a different experience. I lost my brother to a murder, which is a different experience, but loss is loss, and so we could still bond. Now, she definitely needed to go on her journey and understand certain things, and I am on my journey still, and I connect with other people about sibling loss, and also with murder and homicide, but having a grief buddy, that's something that I also had to learn. So in all of this, and in all of these things that I was doing to cope, I think it really propelled me into, I don't know if I was healing yet. In my mind, I didn't realize it, but I actually was in my soul. Bonnie was a gift from my brother. Getting the tattoo was a way for me to be like, no one can ever take him from me. He's a part of my physical body until I go on and move on from this life. And then I also have, and still have to this day, this beautiful friend that was going through grief and loss as well. She lost her mother suddenly. And so we had that in common too. So there was kind of a double up there. So she could understand me in that way. And I started to, I think, heal, but also started to cope in these ways. But I needed to do what was right for myself. And I think that's the message. And I think that's why this episode was very difficult for me to record, because these were really challenging things for me to do, because I didn't want to get out of bed most days. And here I was, like, finding out my mentor, my boss, like, wasn't going to be around anymore. Was I going to take that time? Was I going to leave my job? I never thought I'd get a tattoo, and here I am putting ashes of my brother who had been murdered inside of my body. I'm adopting this beautiful little pup that I had no idea would be in my life. and I have a great friend that I consider to be just a soul sister for life. And I think it really was the beginning of not only coping, because I thought I was just kind of coping and holding on. Things would get dark again. They would definitely get dark again. But this was the beginning of me putting one foot in front of the other and learning to live my life in a way that was independent and without my brother in the physical world. And how would I do that? And how would I become a successful person without him here in the physical world as a surviving sibling? Thank you so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it for you, then share it on your chosen social media platform. And don't forget to tag us at Surviving Siblings Podcast so that more surviving siblings can find us. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Surviving Siblings Podcast. All links can be found in the show notes, so be sure to check those out too. Thank you again for the support. Until the next episode, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings.